They formally accused her of catastrophic failure. The official record, which it is my duty to transcribe, states that on cycle 7.4 of the Stargazer expedition, Dr. Aris Thorne of Earth committed gross negligence, violated 17 interstellar containment protocols, and made a reckless, emotional decision that resulted in the loss of 3 security drones and the near-total compromise of the vessel. The record is precise, logical, and thoroughly damning. But what the record fails to mention, what no data log could ever capture, is the truth I witnessed in that sterile hearing chamber on Nexus 7. And that truth was infinitely more terrifying than failure. My name is Xylos, and as a Sigmund chronicler, it is my purpose to observe. But that was the day I learned that true observation requires one to look past the facts and into the silence that surrounds them. The silence in that chamber was a physical thing, a pressure against the senses, amplified by the geometric precision of the Valerian architecture. It was a room designed to make you feel small, to make your arguments feel insignificant against the weight of established order. And at the center of that order sat Arbiter Kyle. To call him imposing would be an understatement. The Valerians are carved from living metal and certainty, and Kyle was their finest sculpture. He radiated a kind of gravitational pull, a confidence born from a civilization that had never been wrong because it had never encountered a problem its logic could not solve. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the chilling efficiency of a surgical laser. "Dr. Thorne," he began, his gaze fixed on the small, still figure seated before him, "the evidence presented is unequivocal. Your actions aboard the Stargazer were not merely a deviation from procedure. They were an affront to the very principles of logical crisis management that bind this coalition together. You were presented with a Tier 4 biohazard breach. Your solution was to introduce variables that no sane tactical model could account for. You chose chaos over order." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. From my position, I could see the subtle shift in the Arbiter's shimmering skin, a sign of what my species perceives as profound intellectual contempt. He truly believed he was looking at a primitive, a creature governed by fear and instinct. And then there was her, Dr. Aris Thorne, the human, the architect of this alleged disaster. She sat in the accused's chair, not with the defiant posture of a warrior or the trembling fear of the guilty, but with an unnerving, profound stillness. While Kyle spoke, she did not flinch. She did not fidget. She simply watched him, her dark eyes holding a kind of ancient patience, as if he were a particularly complex weather pattern she was calmly observing. She wore the standard gray jumpsuit of the hearing, yet on her it seemed less like a uniform and more like a disguise. We, the Council, had spent 3 cycles reviewing the data logs, the frantic energy spikes, the corrupted video feeds, the chilling audio of alarms blaring over the flat, computerized voice announcing containment failure. We had constructed a narrative of panic and poor judgment. Yet the woman at the center of that narrative was the calmest being in the room. Kyle listed the final charges, his voice a hammer of finality. Violation of the exile's mandate, willful endangerment of a multi-species crew, catastrophic failure to adhere to established safety protocols. How do you respond to these charges, Doctor? The entire chamber held its breath. We expected excuses, justifications, perhaps even an emotional plea for mercy. We were prepared for a human response. What we got was something entirely different. Aris Thorne leaned forward, just enough for the audio sensors to catch her voice, a voice devoid of fear or anger, a voice that was calm, measured, and quiet. "I understand the charges, Arbiter," she said simply. And in that moment, the entire gravitational field of the room seemed to shift. Kael's certainty wavered for a microsecond, an almost imperceptible flutter of his metallic eyelids. My own appendages, poised to transcribe her defense, froze above the console. Her response was not a denial. It was not an admission. It was an acknowledgement, spoken with the serene confidence of someone who had factored all of this into her original calculations. It was then that a cold, terrifying thought began to form in my mind, an acoustic ghost whispering a truth I wasn't ready for. We thought we were judging a failure. We were, in fact, witnessing the consequence of a success we were not equipped to understand.
To understand the human silence in that chamber, you must first understand the life she was studying. You must go back 3 weeks to a time when the starship Stargazer was not a crime scene but a symbol of coalition harmony. From the outside, it was a perfect vessel, a testament to Valerian design philosophy where every corridor was a study in serene efficiency and every system hummed with the quiet confidence of flawless programming. It was a ship built on the principle of order, a place where the chaos of the universe was meant to be neatly cataloged and understood. But harmony, I have learned, is often just a carefully maintained illusion. The division was subtle, unspoken, but always present. The Valerian science decks were sterile temples of light and data, where the universe was reduced to elegant equations on transparent screens. And then there was Deck 7, the xenobiology lab, Dr. Thorne's lab. The Valerians quietly referred to it as the garden, and not with affection. It was a place of controlled chaos, smelling of damp soil, ozone, and things growing in the dark. It was a pocket of unpredictability aboard a vessel that worshipped certainty, and for that reason it was treated with a polite but pervasive condescension. At the heart of this philosophical divide was Alara. She was Arbitrary Kalen's finest student, a prodigy whose mind saw the cosmos as an infinitely complex but ultimately solvable puzzle. She moved through the Stargazer with an intellectual grace that bordered on arrogance, her belief in the supremacy of Valerian logic absolute. She saw Aris Thorne not as a peer, but as a quaint anachronism, a scientist who still relied on intuition and observation in an age of predictive modeling. And she saw Aris's latest discovery as nothing more than a fascinating new variable for her equations. The specimen had been designated Xylos 734. It was retrieved from a tidally locked moon whose dark side pulsed with a faint, global luminescence. To the casual observer, it was little more than a sample of black, velvety fungus housed in a high-density containment sphere. But even in the initial scans, it was clear this was something different. It was a symbiotic colony, a network of mycelia that communicated not just through chemical signals, but through rapid quantum-entangled particle exchanges. It displayed a terrifying efficiency, learning and adapting at a cellular level. When introduced to a new nutrient, it would map the nutrient's molecular structure and reconfigure its own digestive enzymes for optimal absorption within minutes. It was, as Aris noted in her first log, not just alive, but aggressively alive. But it was Alara who took a special interest. She saw in Xylos 734 a chance to prove her theories on non-neural intelligence. The conflict between them began in that very lab, an exchange I have since reviewed from the ship's logs 100 times. Alara stood amidst the strange flora of Aris's lab, her silver form a stark contrast to the organic disarray. "Its response time is remarkable," she stated, her eyes fixed on the pulsing network within the sphere. "My models predict that with sufficient energy input, its biomass could double every 7 hours. A truly efficient organism." Aris was tending to a terrarium of Terran ferns, her hands stained with soil. She didn't look up. "It's not just efficient, Alara. It's strategic. This morning, I introduced a mild neurotoxin to one corner of its environment. It didn't just retreat. It severed its network from the contaminated area, sacrificed a part of itself to protect the whole, and then began producing an enzyme that neutralized the toxin. It learned from the attack and developed a defense. That isn't just an impulse. That's a tactic."
Alara emitted a soft, patronizing chime, the Valerian equivalent of a dismissive laugh. Doctor, you are anthropomorphizing a fungus. It is a complex system of chemoreactive chains, nothing more. It does not think, it calculates. There is a fundamental difference. Aris finally straightened up and looked at the young Valerian, her gaze steady. Is there? You see a system to be optimized. I see a life form that prioritizes survival above all else. And I'm telling you, we do not understand its definition of survival or what it might sacrifice to achieve it. Not ours, at least. We need to be cautious. That single exchange defined everything that was to come. It was the moment two philosophies collided, the Valerian belief that anything that could be measured could be controlled, and the human intuition that some things were too alien to ever be fully understood. The official logs show that over the next 2 weeks, Aris Thorne filed 3 formal requests to classify Xylo 734 as a Tier 5 biohazard and halt all metabolic acceleration experiments. All 3 were denied by the ship's Valerian command, citing Alara's predictive models which showed a less than 0.01% chance of containment breach under controlled stimuli. The logs also show Alara repeatedly increasing the energy feed to the containment sphere, pushing the organism's growth, hungry for more data to complete her puzzle. She was so confident in her logic, so certain of her control. She did not realize that she wasn't the one conducting the experiment anymore. The fungus was studying her, learning her methods, her predictability, her logic. In her final log entry before the alarms sounded, Alara noted her intention to introduce a direct neural link to the containment sphere, to map its computational pathways directly. It was a decision rooted in perfect Valerian reason, an attempt to understand the organism by forcing it to speak a language of pure data. And it would be the catalyst for a horror that logic could not contain.
The recordings from the moments before the breach are almost painful to watch now, colored as they are by the terrible knowledge of what came next. You can see Alara in the observation dome overlooking the containment sphere, her silver form illuminated by the glow of 100 data streams. She was the picture of Valerian confidence, a conductor preparing to lead a symphony of pure information. Her plan, as she outlined in that final hubristic log entry, was to create a direct data bridge, a benign interface that would translate the specimen's quantum-entangled communications into a language her tactical models could understand. She called it the dialogue. For the first 37 seconds, it was a breathtaking success. The main view screen filled with the data stream from Xylos 734, and it was beautiful. It was a cascade of impossible geometries, of fractal patterns that bloomed and folded in on themselves with a complexity that dwarfed any art our coalition had ever produced. Alara was ecstatic. I have the audio recording of her, clear and triumphant. "It's working," she announced to her team. "It is a pure, logical intelligence. It's showing us its structure, its very essence." But she was wrong. It wasn't showing her its essence. It was reading hers. It was learning. She had opened a door, and in her arrogance, she had failed to consider what might be waiting on the other side. She was offering a handshake to a creature that had never learned the concept of a hand, only a fist. The shift was instantaneous. One moment, the screen displayed a symphony of creation. The next, it was a shriek of weaponized data. The elegant fractals became jagged, predatory code. The ship's computer, a Valerian VI of immense power, began screaming alerts in its flat, monotone voice. "Warning! Foreign data intrusion! Quarantine protocols compromised! Warning!" Alara's triumphant expression dissolved into confusion, then horror. On the screen, the data stream reversed. Information was no longer flowing out of the sphere, it was flooding into it. Xylos 734 had spent 2 weeks learning our language of energy and data, and Alara had just handed it the master key to the entire ship. The containment sphere did not shatter with a blast of energy. That would have been too simple, too chaotic. No, it did something far more terrifying. It dissolved. The high-energy field holding it together flickered, destabilized by a precise viral code, and winked out of existence. For a single silent second, the black velvety mass of the fungus hung in the zero gravity of the inner chamber. Then it pulsed. A shimmering cloud of spores, like a galaxy of black diamonds, erupted outwards. The ship's computer announced the inevitable, its voice a chilling counterpoint to the rising panic. Containment failure! Deck 7, sealing blast doors. But the doors never sealed. The first wave of spores, moving with unnatural speed and purpose, had already found the door mechanisms. We have the internal scans from that moment. You can see the metal of the gears and servos turning a dull, cancerous gray, then crumbling into dust. The creature wasn't breaking through the ship's defenses, it was dismantling them from the inside out. What followed was not a battle, it was a consumption. The Stargazer's security protocols, designed by the finest logical minds in the Valerian ascendancy, were predicated on a fatal assumption that the enemy would behave like an enemy, that it would have a command structure, a source of power, a tangible weakness. But Xylos 734 was not an army, it was a plague with a mind. The Valerian security teams responded by the book. They deployed patrol drones that fired focused plasma bursts. The security logs show these moments in terrifying clarity. Each plasma bolt that struck the rapidly growing fungal mass would cause it to recoil, only for it to grow back seconds later, thicker and stronger, a dark char covering the impact point as if it were a fresh layer of armor. It was feeding on the energy. It was thriving on their aggression. The corridors of Deck 7, once pristine and white, were now terrifying arteries of pulsing black mycelia and thick, sweet-smelling fog. The lights flickered and died as the spores found the power conduits, corroding them not with heat, but with a kind of rapid biological decay. The comms filled with static, then panicked shouts, then the wet, tearing sound of metal giving way. Every logical response was not only ineffective, it was actively detrimental. They were fighting a fire with gasoline. And in the lab, at the heart of the outbreak, Ilara and her two assistants were trapped. The main door was sealed shut, not by a blast shield, but by a live-in wall of the fungus, which pulsed with a soft internal light, seeming to watch them with 1,000 unseen eyes. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something alien, something like rain on dead soil. We have the final audio logs from inside that room. You can hear her, the prodigy, the perfect logician, her voice stripped of all its condescending certainty, replaced with a raw primal terror that is universal to all life. "This is not possible," she whispered, her breathing ragged. The models did not predict this." Her assistant was screaming for help, his voice muffled, but it was the last sound recorded from that room that chilled me to my very core when I first heard it. It was not a scream. It was not the sound of the creature breaking through the inner viewport. It was a soft, melodic chime, a perfect mimicry of the sound a Valerian makes to express patronizing dismissal. The same sound Ilara had made in Aris Thorne's lab 2 weeks prior. The creature that had trapped her, the life form she had dismissed as a simple chemoreactive fungus, was now actively mocking her with her own arrogance. It had learned more than just our technology. It had learned our contempt.
The bridge of the Stargazer, the logical heart of the vessel, had descended into chaos. The security logs from that period show a command crew paralyzed by paradox. Every protocol they initiated, every weapon they fired, every logical step they took only accelerated their own destruction.
They were trying to solve an equation that had become sentient and was now actively rewriting the rules of mathematics. The Valerian captain, a veteran of 100 peaceful survey missions, was staring at his tactical display, watching in horror as entire sections of his ship were being digested, and he was utterly, completely lost. It was into this cacophony of failing logic that a single, calm voice cut through the comms from the supposedly primitive biology lab on Deck 7. It was Aris Thorne. "Stop firing your weapons," she said, her voice devoid of panic. "You're not killing it, you're feeding it." A stunned silence fell over the bridge. The captain responded, his voice tight with stress. "Doctor, what are you talking about? We are under attack." Aris's reply was swift and brutal in its clarity. "No, Captain, you are being metabolized. Zyro 734 is not a predator. It is a terraformer. It consumes energy and matter to expand its environment. Your plasma cannons are a feast. Your ship is its nutrient paste. You must stop thinking of it as an enemy to be fought." "Then what do you suggest, Doctor?" the captain shot back, his frustration boiling over. "That we simply let it consume us?" This was the moment, the nexus point. The audio log captures Aris taking a single, steadying breath before she laid out a plan so contrary to Valerian philosophy, so alien in its reasoning, that it was initially registered by the ship's computer as a system error. "We can't kill it, but we can put it to sleep. The organism's metabolism is oxygen-based. I've cross-referenced its cellular structure with 3 other extremophilic fungi. A sudden, total deprivation of oxygen, replaced with an inert gas like nitrogen, should trigger a dormant state. I need you to vent all atmosphere from decks 6, 7, and 8, and flood them with pure nitrogen." For a full 5 seconds, the only sound on the comms was the hum of failing life support. The captain's voice, when he finally spoke, was trembling with disbelief and fury. "Deck 7 is still occupied. Officer Alara and her team are trapped in that lab. You are suggesting we suffocate one of my own officers to test the theory? That is not a solution, Doctor. That is an execution. Requests denied." But Aris Thorne was no longer asking for permission. "Captain," she replied, her voice now hard as diamond, "in 3 minutes, the organism will breach the primary fusion conduits. When that happens, it will consume the entire ship and all 84 souls aboard. Your officer is already dead if we do nothing. My way, she has a chance. A small one, but it's more than you are offering her now." And then she severed the connection to the bridge. The subsequent video logs are fragmented, taken from flickering security cameras as Aris moved with a purpose that bordered on preternatural. She wasn't a soldier executing a maneuver. She was a biologist applying a desperate, terrible cure. The logs show her in an emergency locker, bypassing the pristine, fully charged rebreather units. Instead, she grabbed a damaged one, a unit marked for repair, its oxygen gauge flickering erratically. She then secured a separate, fully charged emergency oxygen tank, not for herself, but small enough to be passed through a standard emergency transfer port. The camera on Corridor 8B caught her just as she emerged, a lone figure moving against the tide of retreating crew members. The walls of the corridor were no longer metal. They were sweating a black, oily film, and the air was already thin, shimmering with alien spores. She moved through the encroaching nightmare, her only focus on the access panel at the far end of the hall. She was not running from the monster. She was running towards its heart. At the entrance to the main Deck 7 lab, she saw them through the reinforced viewport. Alara and one surviving assistant, huddled in a corner, their silver forms dull with terror as the black fungus pressed against the glass, its internal light pulsing like a slow, malevolent heartbeat. Aris didn't hesitate. She slammed the emergency O2 tank into the transfer port, cycled it through, and watched it fall to the floor on the other side. She saw the flash of comprehension, of stunned, horrified gratitude in Alara's wide eyes. She didn't wait to see if they would use it. She was already at the environmental control panel, her hands flying across the surface, overriding the safeties that were designed to prevent exactly what she was about to do. Her own rebreather sputtered, and the log from her suit's biometric sensors began to register what was happening. Oxygen level, 27%. Heart rate, 142 BPM. She slammed her palm onto the final activation plate. A deep, shuddering hiss echoed through the ship as the atmospheric pumps reversed. On the other side of the glass, the pulsing black mass recoiled as if struck, its lights flickering violently as the life-giving oxygen was torn away from it. It was working. But the log continued its silent, terrifying report. Oxygen level, 19%. Warning, hypoxia imminent. Aris stumbled back from the console, her movements suddenly clumsy. She pressed her helmet against the viewport, watching her solution take hold, watching the creature's aggressive expansion slow, dim, and finally cease. She had won. The ship was saved. And the final entry from her suit's telemetry, recorded 1 second before all its systems failed, was brutally simple. Heart rate, 48 beats per minute. Oxygen level, 9%. User vitals, critical. Life support, failed. And then just like the monster on the other side of the glass, her feed went dark, and she fell into a dormant, silent state of her own.
The final data log from Aris Thorne's suit blinked off the main screen, plunging the hearing chamber back into its own cold, sterile light. But the silence that filled the void was different now. It was not the silence of judgment or condescension. It was the heavy, profound silence of minds that have been irrevocably fractured, of certainties that have been ground into dust. My own appendages were still, poised over a console whose official record now felt like a child's fantasy. We had come here to prosecute a crime, and had instead borne witness to a miracle of survival that defied every principle we held sacred. But my gaze, like that of everyone in the chamber, was fixed upon Arbiter Kalen, the great Valerian logician, the being of pure, unflappable reason, was staring at the blank screen where the human had just, for all intents and purposes, died. His metallic form was rigid, but for the first time I could detect a dissonance in him, a faint tremor in the tips of his fingers, a subtle wavering of the light within his optic sensors. His entire civilization was built upon the bedrock of predictable outcomes, and he had just witnessed an event that his logic could neither predict nor process. When he finally turned his head to look at Aris Thorne, his voice had lost its surgical precision. It was thin, hollow, the sound of a vast emptiness. "Why?" he asked, the word an uncharacteristic plea. "The logic is flawed. You had the solution. You could have saved the ship from a safe location. Instead, you risked everything, the mission, the vessel, your own life, for the very individual who guaranteed its failure. It was an unnecessary variable. It was illogical." Aris Thorne had been silent for hours, a still point in the storm of our accusations. Now she leaned forward, and the universe seemed to lean in with her. She looked at the Arbiter, and her eyes held no triumph, no anger. They held a strange, ancient kind of sympathy. "Your logic, Arbiter," she said, her voice as quiet as it had been at the start, "was forged in the serene calculus of stable worlds and the clean vacuum of space. It is the logic of architects, of mathematicians, who believe the universe is a puzzle that can be solved." She paused, letting her words hang in the silent room. "Our logic," she continued, "was forged in mud and blood. It was born on a planet where everything was actively, violently trying to kill everything else. Our seasons tried to freeze us. Our plagues tried to burn us from within. The beasts of our world tried to tear us apart. And when we ran out of beasts, we turned on each other. Our history is not a clean equation, Arbiter. It is a frantic, bloody, desperate scramble for survival, written in the language of broken bones and last stands." Kalen's stillness was now absolute. He was listening. "On Earth," Aris said, her voice resonating with a truth far older than the coalition itself. The lone genius who calculates the perfect path is the first to die in a flash flood. The individual who is strongest is the first to be brought down by a sickness they cannot see. Our evolution does not reward solitary perfection. It rewards the tribe that pulls its weakest members from the fire. It rewards the hunter who throws himself in front of the beast to save the one beside him. We protect our own, even the ones who make mistakes, not because it is emotional, but because our history has taught us in the most brutal ways imaginable that the pack is always, always stronger than the wolf. What I did was not a sacrifice. It was an equation, the most logical one I could make. Alara and the 83 others on that ship were worth more than the risk to my single life. It is the cold, pragmatic, and utterly effective logic of a survivor. You may not find it in your tactical manuals, Arbiter, but you will find it etched into the fossil record of every single monster we have ever outlasted. Silence. Absolute, unending silence. Finally, Arbiter Kalen slowly rose to his full, towering height. He looked at Aris Thorne, the small, fragile human who had just dismantled his entire worldview. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He simply nodded, a gesture so foreign to his species it was a profound concession in itself. "The charges," he said, his voice flat with the weight of revelation, "are dismissed." I watched Aris Thorne leave the chamber, not as a defendant, but as an ambassador for a philosophy so powerful it masqueraded as weakness. And as I completed the official chronicle of the Stargazer incident, I added a private addendum, a truth for the archives that no one else would read, but that I knew was the most important discovery of the entire expedition. I wrote, "The Valerians seek perfection. Humans seek survival. And in a universe that is anything but perfect, I have come to believe that the latter is the more formidable power. They are not dangerous because they are strong or fast. They are dangerous because when faced with an impossible abyss, they will not waste time calculating the odds of a fall. They will simply start building a bridge."